Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, June 11th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. Today in Riverside, the temperature will reach a high of 91.9 degrees and drop to a low of 64 degrees, so please be sure to stay hydrated and keep cool if you are spending time outdoors. On the program today, we are taking a look at how SpaceX plans to break records with its initial public offering by shifting its focus toward artificial intelligence. We will also examine how a major police reform law in California is currently leading to significant backlogs in the legal system. In addition to these topics, we have a variety of other headlines to cover. All this and more is coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. We're tracking what could be the biggest market debut in history, and it's happening tomorrow. SpaceX is about to go public, and the numbers are simply staggering. For more, we're joined by our business reporter, Ethan. Ethan, set the stage for us. Just how big is this offering?
Grace, this is genuinely historic. According to NPR, Yahoo Finance, and Crypto Briefing, SpaceX is aiming to raise $75 billion when it lists tomorrow, June 12th. That would more than double the previous record of $29.4 billion held by Saudi Aramco back in 2019. We're talking about an offering that doesn't just break the record, it obliterates it. And it all happens one day from now.
Wow. So what does this actually mean for SpaceX's overall valuation?
It's eye-watering. Crypto Briefing reports the deal would value SpaceX somewhere between $1.75 trillion and $1.8 trillion. That puts the company in an extremely small club alongside Amazon and Alphabet. SpaceX filed a June update with the Securities and Exchange Commission detailing the sale of more than 555 million shares at an expected price of $135 each. The ticker will be SPCX, and it lists on the NASDAQ.
And who's running the show on Wall Street for a deal this size?
The banking syndicate is led by Goldman Sachs, with Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan Chase as primary underwriters. In total, you're looking at a group of 21 to 23 investment banks involved. But here's where it gets interesting. SpaceX negotiated underwriting fees below 0.75%, which works out to roughly $500 million total. That's well below the 1 to 2% you typically see in mega offerings, so the banks took a haircut for the prestige.
That's a remarkable concession. What about everyday investors? Can regular folks actually get in on this?
That's one of the most unusual parts of this deal. Yahoo Finance and Morningstar analysts noted that the company has reserved roughly 30% of the shares for retail investors. That's an extraordinarily large allocation by IPO standards, and demand has been overwhelming. The offering is oversubscribed by nearly 4 times, with total demand exceeding $250 billion, so plenty of people will walk away empty-handed.
Let's talk about the underlying business. Is SpaceX actually making money?
It's complicated, Grace. According to the S-1 filing analyzed by Morningstar and Forbes, SpaceX brought in $18.7 billion in revenue in 2025. That's a 33% increase year over year, but the company reported a net loss of $4.94 billion. That deficit is largely tied to aggressive capital spending on Starship development and the February 2026 merger with Elon Musk's AI startup, XAI.
So this new SpaceX is really 3 businesses rolled into one?
Exactly right. The first pillar is space launch, where SpaceX dominates with over 80% of U.S. launches. The second is Starlink, which is the real cash cow, generating $11.39 billion in 2025 revenue with over 12 million global subscribers. And the third pillar is XAI, which has been repositioned and rebranded as the Orbital AI division. There's also a quirky detail Crypto Briefing flagged.
What's that?
The S1 revealed SpaceX holds 18,712 Bitcoin, valued at roughly $1.45 billion. It's a notable nugget, but it represents less than 0.1% of the company's total valuation, so it's more of a curiosity than a core part of the story.
Let's get into that Orbital AI vision. What exactly is SpaceX planning to build in space?
This is where the controversy really heats up. SpaceX intends to use IPO proceeds to build orbital AI data centers. Forbes and technical analysts at Times describe the company's AI-1 satellite design as featuring a 70-meter wingspan and a 120-kilowatt compute payload. The idea is essentially a supercomputer floating in orbit. But independent aerospace engineers and thermodynamics experts are openly skeptical that the physics actually work.
Skeptical how? What's the problem with running data centers in space?
They're calling it the physics wall. In the vacuum of space, heat can only be dissipated through infrared radiation, which is governed by the Stefan Boltzmann law. Experts cited by Morningstar argue that to cool high-performance AI chips down to a workable 35 to 45 degrees Celsius, the radiators would need to be enormous, far larger than anything we can currently build or launch. Critics suggest the orbital AI narrative may really be a strategic total addressable market expander designed to justify a $1 trillion valuation that launch and Starlink alone simply can't support.
That's a pretty serious accusation. And I understand there's political pushback too?
Significant pushback, Grace. Seeking Alpha and Business Insider reported that Senator Elizabeth Warren sent a 12-page letter to SEC Chairman Paul Atkins on June 9th, just 2 days ago, urging a delay of the IPO. Warren characterized the XAI merger as a, quote, bailout, end quote, for the AI startup. She points out that XAI reportedly lost $6.36 billion in 2025 and was burning through $1 billion per month.
So how does folding XAI into SpaceX change the financial picture for shareholders?
That's exactly Warren's concern. By rolling XAI into SpaceX, Musk effectively moves those staggering losses onto the balance sheet of the profitable Starlink division. So public shareholders are essentially being asked to absorb XAI's burn rate. And on top of that, there's a major governance issue that's drawing fire from corporate watchdogs.
What does the governance structure actually look like?
Musk will retain an extraordinarily tight grip. He'll hold between 84.4% and 85% of the voting power, despite owning roughly 42% of the equity. That dual-class structure leaves public shareholders with virtually no recourse on company decisions. So if you buy in tomorrow, you're betting entirely on Musk's judgment. There is no meaningful check from the public float.
And yet investors are still piling in. What does this mean for other big tech names waiting in the wings?
The ripple effects could be enormous. According to Binance and Forbes, SpaceX is essentially setting a $1 trillion psychological floor for frontier AI labs. Anthropic filed a confidential S-1 on June 1st with a target debut in October and a private valuation of $965 billion. And OpenAI filed its confidential S-1 on June 8th, just 3 days ago, seeking a valuation between $850 billion and $1 trillion, with a likely listing in late 2026 or early 2027.
So we could see a wave of these mega AI IPOs over the next year?
That's the expectation. And there's another wrinkle that will turbocharge SpaceX specifically. NPR noted that NASDAQ and FTSE Russell have already agreed to fast-track SpaceX into their indexes. That will force passive index funds to reallocate massive amounts of capital toward the stock almost immediately after the debut. So even investors who weren't planning to buy SpaceX will end up owning it through their retirement accounts.
Is everyone on Wall Street buying into this trillion-dollar story, though?
Not at all. Morningstar maintains what they call a bearish fair value estimate of $780 billion. That's less than half the $1.75 trillion target. Their argument is that the current valuation relies on unproven engineering and what they're calling moonshot scenarios. So if those orbital data centers don't pan out, there could be a long, painful repricing once the initial euphoria fades.
And yet, despite all of that, the demand is still off the charts.
Off the charts is exactly right. With the IPO oversubscribed nearly 4 times and institutional demand at record highs, SpaceX is on track to cement Elon Musk's status as the world's first trillionaire. Whether you view tomorrow as a triumph of innovation or as a cautionary tale about exuberance, it's going to redefine what the public markets thought was possible.
Quite a story to watch unfold tomorrow morning. Ethan, thanks so much for breaking it all down for us.
My pleasure, Grace. I'll be watching that opening bell very closely.
Welcome back. 6 years ago, the murder of George Floyd sparked a global push for police reform, and California led the way with a landmark law called Assembly Bill 1506. But this morning, that reform is in serious trouble. Here to walk us through it is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yeah, this is one of those stories where the road to reform has hit a wall. Assembly Bill 1506 was supposed to be the gold standard for police accountability. Instead, according to a major investigation by CalMatters, it's created what advocates are calling a justice bottleneck. And in some cases, it's effectively granting what critics describe as accidental immunity to officers.
Wow. So before we get into what's gone wrong, remind us what this law was actually designed to do.
Sure. Back in 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom signed Assembly Bill 1506 into law. It was a direct response to George Floyd's death and to the 2018 shooting of Stephon Clark in Sacramento. The idea, championed by then Assembly member Rob Bonta, was that local district attorneys had an inherent conflict of interest investigating the same police agencies they relied on every day. So the law shifted responsibility for investigating fatal shootings of unarmed civilians from local DAs to the state attorney general's office.
And Rob Bonta himself ended up running that office. Did he make any specific promises?
He did. When Bonta became Attorney General in 2021, he pledged to complete every one of these investigations within 12 months. Advocates, as LAist reported at the time, really believed an independent state agency would bring more credibility, more investigative firepower, and crucially, more speed. That 12-month goal became the benchmark. And as of today, June 11th, 2026, here's the headline. The California Department of Justice has not closed a single investigation within that 1-year window.
Not one? In 5 years?
Not one. CalMatters, in reporting published through KPBS and LAist, found that the average fatal shooting investigation now takes the DOJ nearly 2 years and 5 months to complete. Out of 41 closed cases, only 8 wrapped up in under 2 years. And at least 13 investigations have stretched beyond 3 years, which, as we'll get into, is a critical legal threshold in California.
And what about prosecutions? Has the office actually charged anyone?
That's where it gets really striking. To date, Attorney General Bonta's office has not prosecuted a single officer. They haven't referred a single officer for decertification. They haven't recommended administrative discipline in any of these cases. 0, across the board. So the system designed to bring accountability has, so far, produced none.
Chloe, you mentioned a 3-year threshold. Why does that number matter so much?
This is the really crucial piece, Grace. Back in 2021, California passed Senate Bill 2, the state's police decertification law. Under that law, the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, known as POST, has a strict 3-year window to decertify an officer for serious misconduct. So when a DOJ investigation drags past 3 years, the clock runs out. POST loses the legal authority to revoke an officer's license, even if the DOJ eventually concludes there was misconduct.
So an officer could be found at fault and still keep working?
Exactly. They could remain in law enforcement or move to a different department entirely, and it goes beyond decertification. CalMatters notes that this 3-year delay also pushes past the statute of limitations for many criminal charges short of murder, things like involuntary manslaughter or assault. Former Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert told CalMatters that 3 years is, quote, an awful long period of time, end quote, to reach these legal limits. The practical effect is that delay itself is shielding officers from consequences.
That's stunning. I understand there's one case in particular that really illustrates how this plays out.
Yes, the case of David Couch. KPBS detailed this one in depth. Couch was shot 4 times by California Highway Patrol Officer Ryan Cates in Redding back in February 2023. The whole encounter lasted only 1 minute. Couch suffered from bipolar disorder. He had knives strapped to his jacket, but he never touched them. He was shot after gaining control of the officer's taser.
And how long did the state investigation take?
1,199 days. That's the staggering number. It wasn't until June 2nd of this year, just 9 days ago, that the DOJ finally released its report. They declined to pursue criminal charges against Officer Cates, citing insufficient evidence. The criminal probe is over, but the civil lawsuit filed by the Couch family, listed as case number 2:24 CV 00481, remains active in federal court.
And during those 3+ years, was anyone else investigating? Local police? The sheriff?
That's another layer of the problem. Cal Matters and LAist report that local authorities, like the Reading Police Department, take what's described as a hands-off approach. They refuse to run their own parallel criminal investigations once the state gets involved. So the state DOJ becomes the sole arbiter of justice. And when the state takes 3 years and 3 months to deliver an answer, families are left in limbo that whole time.
So why is the state taking so long? Is this about money, manpower, something else?
It's a mix, but funding is at the heart of it. Bonta has consistently blamed the backlog on a lack of legislative resources. His predecessor, Xavier Becerra, originally requested $26 million to staff 4 investigative teams across California. The legislature only provided $13 million. That cut the program in half, leaving just 2 investigative teams to cover the entire state.
Just 2 teams for all of California? That sounds impossible.
It really does. And internal DOJ emails obtained by investigators show employees describe themselves as undermanned and overwhelmed almost from the start. But there's another factor too, a legal one. The DOJ applies what's called the objective reasonableness standard under California Penal Code Section 835A. That requires prosecutors to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that an officer's use of force was not justified. And LAist reports that internal memos reveal real disagreement among DOJ staff about how to define an imminent threat.
But the office has stayed conservative on those calls?
Very conservative, and that has produced this 0% prosecution rate. And here's what really fuels the critics. Even in the 8 cases that were completed within 2 years, well within the statute of limitations, the DOJ still recommended 0 charges and 0 decertifications. So critics argue the backlog isn't just a resource problem. They say it functions as a political shield for an office that's wary of the fallout from actually prosecuting law enforcement officers.
Are lawmakers doing anything about all of this?
They are. As of today, June 11th, there's a high-profile measure called the tolling bill moving through the Assembly Public Safety Committee. The idea is to toll, or pause, the statute of limitations clock the moment a DOJ investigation begins. The clock would only restart once a final report is issued. That would prevent officers from running out the legal window simply because the state took too long.
And are there other reforms already on the books?
Yes, a couple of important ones. Assembly Bill 354, passed last year in 2025, gave Post direct access to law enforcement telecommunications so it can verify misconduct independently. And just recently, the Assembly passed Assembly Bill 1806, which expands the Attorney General's investigative authority to include fatal shootings by federal immigration officers operating in California.
Though I imagine that adds even more work to those overstretched teams.
That's exactly the criticism. Advocates support the broader authority, but they worry it will only pile more weight onto 2 teams that are already buckling. Without significant new funding, expanding the mission could deepen the backlog rather than solve it.
Chloe, as you step back, what's the larger lesson here?
I think Assembly Bill 1506 is becoming a cautionary tale, Grace. It successfully removed these investigations from local district attorneys to eliminate that conflict of interest Rob Bonta warned about. But it replaced that problem with a centralized bottleneck that, in many cases, has made it impossible to hold officers legally or professionally accountable. A law meant to bring speed and credibility has instead delivered years of silence for victims, families, and for the officers involved. It's opened up a real legal loophole. Whether the tolling bill closes that gap is now the big question in Sacramento.
Really powerful reporting. Chloe, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us this morning.
Thank you, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The situation in the Middle East is reaching a boiling point after the United States launched a second wave of airstrikes against Iranian military targets late Wednesday and early Thursday morning. U.S. Central Command reports that Navy, Air Force, and Marine assets utilized precision munitions, including 49 Tomahawk cruise missiles, to strike air defense sites, surveillance radars, and communications hubs. President Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth described the operations as self-defense measures following the downing of a U.S. Apache helicopter, hoping to pressure Tehran back to the negotiating table. However, Iran has already fired back, launching missiles at U.S.-linked air bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan. This striking escalation has caused 3 maritime deaths after a U.S. strike disabled a tanker, and with the Strait of Hormuz now closed to commercial traffic, the global oil market is facing a crude awakening. The ripples of that conflict are already being felt in the American wallet. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the annual inflation rate rose to 4.2% in May, its highest level in 3 years. This energy shock, fueled by the maritime blockade, pushed gasoline prices up 40.5% over the last year. While core inflation rose a more modest 0.2% for the month and 2.9% annually, the data is putting a lot of interest on Federal Reserve Chair Kevin Warsh as he prepares for his first policy meeting. While Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent views the spike as a temporary disruption, investors are clearly fed up, with the Dow Jones and Nasdaq both falling more than 1.2%. On a more sporting note, the world of soccer is finally kicking off today as the 23rd FIFA World Cup begins in Mexico City. This edition of the tournament is a real game-changer, featuring an expanded field of 48 teams and 104 matches across 16 host cities in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. While Mexico and South Africa face off at Estadio Azteca, officials are navigating a pitch-perfect logistical challenge involving 3 different immigration systems. Despite some borderline drama regarding visa complications for a Somali referee, the opening ceremony is set to be a hit with performances by Shakira, Burna Boy, and the band Mana before the tournament concludes at MetLife Stadium on July 19th. In a rare piece of positive news, the United Nations reports that global forced displacement fell for the first time in a decade, dropping to 117.8 million people by the end of last year. This 4% decline was driven by 14.7 million people returning home, including 5 million refugees who returned to Syria. However, the High Commissioner for Refugees warns that these returns are fragile, and recent conflicts in early 2026 have already displaced another 4 million people, threatening to reverse these gains. Finally, a legal battle in Alabama has left the state's execution plans breathless. A federal judge permanently blocked the state from using nitrogen gas to execute inmate Jeffrey Lee, ruling that the method violates the Eighth Amendment. The 2-to-1 appellate ruling cited a 3-minute window of air hunger that would cause significant suffering. While the Attorney General is trying to gas up an appeal to the Supreme Court before tonight's scheduled execution, the ruling puts the future of this controversial method in serious jeopardy, especially for those whose sentences were the result of a now-abolished judicial override. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.